Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Looking forward to chatting with our next guest. He's another great sport because he came on at the last minute, bailing an old fellow presenter out of the mire. He is a vastly experienced naval aviator and commercial pilot. I would go as far as to say he's one of the most experienced pilots alive today. His career spanned over 5 decades. In the past, he's talked to us about German wings, Flight 9525, the Malaysian Airlines disappearing plane. He's been on to talk to us about a lot of these things, giving us his expert take on them. He, of course, was the man who blew the whistle on the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot some years ago. His website is abeldanger.net. Get on there straight away. There's also a terrific chat room on there as well, by the way, dealing with all of these issues. Let's welcome back to the programme, Field McConnell. Field, thanks for coming back, and thanks for doing it at short notice. How are you, my old pal?
Well, I'm very good, and I want to give you a compliment, Richie. Was your previous guest Patrick Henningsen?
Yeah, Patrick was on tonight. Yeah, he also jumped in at the last minute. So there you go. Two good sports.
Well, good for him. During my radio show, which is David Hawkins and myself, we were just on for an hour and a half. And during that show, your call came in asking me to be on. So my listeners and our listeners heard you. and they were quite impressed. And also, they made the comments, and I could show you in the chat room. I got numerous comments in our chat room that between Richie Allen and Patrick Henningsen, our chatters think that you two fellows do the best interviews. So that's a feather in your cap, and it's always my pleasure to join you. What can I do for you today?
Well, it's wonderful you coming on unexpectedly like this, because I thought the best thing to do, we don't often get a chance to grill. Now, I'm not kissing your backside when I say this, but to grill an expert about all things aviation. So I threw it out to the listeners. I said, what would you like to ask a man with that much experience of flying every jet ever made? And the listeners have come through loud and clear, Field. And I want to ask you a series of questions. Some of them you've probably heard 100,000 times before. But I don't think they'll be, I don't think you'll find them too boring. And here's the question. We have one from Dion, and Dion's in Denmark at the moment, and she asks about the Twin Towers, the North and the South Tower. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Alison sent me this afternoon when I rang you, just as I was coming on air. Richie, do me a favour. When you've had Field on in the past, it's to talk about the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot, and it's been to talk about airline disasters. You've never asked Field, Richie, about the alleged manoeuvres carried out or executed by Hani Hanjwar on September the 11th, 2001, when he allegedly crashed a Boeing 727 into the Pentagon. And we never have dug down into 9/11 with you, Field. Could anybody have executed the manoeuvres or the flight plan that Hani Hanjwar allegedly executed in crashing a plane into the Pentagon? I know you've heard this one before, but it's new for some of our listeners. Could anybody have made that particular, turn and descent and pulled it off?
The answer is no. No human pilot could do that. And there's a very simple reason why no human pilot could do that. By the official transcript of what attacked the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11, the United States government is reporting that the offending aerospace vehicle, whatever it was, the offending vehicle flew over the Pentagon at an altitude of 7,000 feet, and then it executed a nose-low 4 to 6G slice back turn to the right, which means that the flying vehicle rolled 135 degrees clockwise from wings level, and then it was loaded up, which means it was accelerated vertically downward towards the Pentagon. And when it rolled out 15 feet above the Pentagon lawn, it was reported to be going in the neighborhood of 500 miles per hour. A Boeing 757 could not execute that turn for one very simple reason, which your listeners can Google immediately. If your listeners would Google G, that's a capital G standing for the force of gravity, G limits, so capital G space LIMITS, G limits plus B757. If you go to Google or any other search engine, you will see that the gravity loading limits, the G limits on a transport category aircraft like the Boeing 757 range between negative 1.0 G and 2.5 Gs positive, which means if anyone, whether it's myself or my college classmate Chick Burlingame, who was the captain of American 77 on the morning of 9/11, if Chick Burlingame, who is a former Navy F-4 Phantom pilot, or myself, or Hani Hanjour, or anybody else had tried to do a 4 to 6G turn in a 757, one of two things would have occurred. According to the G limits, the wing of the 757 should have broken off because you're exceeding the 2.5 positive G limit. The other possibility is if the automation on the aircraft limited the Gs to 2.5, then the aircraft could not have made that turn in 7,000 feet of vertical descending room. And therefore, the long answer I've given you, the short answer is no human pilot could have made that turn in a 757. And I'll go one further, no autopilot could have made that turn in a 757. And so we can rule out the suggestion that a Boeing 757 hit the Pentagon on 9/11. In fact, a documentary that came out shortly thereafter, the documentary was done by a fellow named David von Kleist, Kleist. The name of the documentary was In Plain Sight, with plain being spelled Plane. And in the documentary, before he modified it and edited something out, in the original documentary, In Plain Sight, a female air traffic controller working Washington approach commented, and it was captured on the audio. She said that American 77 overflew the Pentagon 45 minutes prior to the impact.
Wow, Field. Can I ask you this then?
Sure.
How tragic is it for you, having known the pilot, Charles Burlingame? What happened to him then, do you suspect? I mean, I'm sure when you're not doing radio, I mean, you're not working on Abel Danger. As a pilot, you have times when maybe you're sitting down after a week's work on a Friday and you're having a beer and you're thinking about these things and you're thinking about people that you knew. In your darkest hour, Field, what do you think happened to Charles Burlingame and his crew? What happened to him? What can we conclude happens to him if Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon, as I don't believe it did? Was he murdered somewhere?
Yes, he was murdered with discretion and malice aforethought. And in today's radio show that I just concluded with David Hawkins, we put out some information today that has not been released anywhere in the world prior to today. And when we conclude our discussion, you and I, Richie, I'll send you an affidavit, which I just put out today, which makes the claim. And my name is Field McConnell, and it's me making this claim. We're claiming that in 1985, an FAA traffic management official named Ben Sliney started working with people not limited to these three names, but including these three household names. Actually, 2 out of 3 are household names. The three names are people that worked on the flying attack of 9/11. The name none of your listeners would have heard is my sister, Christine Marcy. Her first name is Kristine. the second name is Hillary Clinton, and the third name is Donald Trump. And my sister and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were cooperating no later than 1988 in creating the false flag attack of 9/11. And if that sounds hard for anybody to believe, they can contact me via email, fieldmcc@yahoo.com, and I will send them a copy of my affidavit, which I created today. We broadcast it today. We have sent copies of it to the Airline Pilots Association, the FBI, the FAA, and several other offices. The affidavit itself will be notarized tomorrow morning at the Bank of Baldwin at the Plum City, Wisconsin branch, and it will be done between 9 a.m. and noon Central Time tomorrow. And the reason I'm giving you all these details, Richie, is no matter who it is, whether it's you or me or Dion from Denmark or Patrick Henningsen, regardless of who it is that speaks the truth of 9/11, we are often attacked by people who claim that we have 10 hats or we make this stuff up. Well, my answer to those critics is, how many people do you know that are creating affidavits, getting them notarized, and entering them into the public domain using their real name, Field McConnell, my real phone number, international code 001-715-307-8222, my real email address, fieldmcc@yahoo.com, and that affidavit has already been promulgated. It will be notarized, and I will send you a copy of the document itself once it's been notarized and signed.
You always do. You always do. Anytime you've ever said to me on the program, I'll send you a document, Richie, you always have, without fail. A lot of guests on programs like this, they make promises about documentation and they don't do it. And Field, I would go one further than, crediting you with the affidavit. I would go one further and say, how many people do you know have flown every commercial aircraft that was ever made and pretty much, all the state-of-the-art naval planes, military planes ever? How many people do you know of that calibre that is coming out talking about what happened on 9/11? Speaking of Dion in Denmark, at 19 minutes past the hour, Dion says, Richie, I don't believe the two planes hit the towers. Planes could never have entered those buildings. It's against simple logic. She is, of course, Field, referring to when we watched it live. Well, we saw the second plane hit live. Many of us did anyway. And then when we saw the replay of the first plane, it appeared that they just disappeared into the buildings. Over the years, people have said, wouldn't we have expected to see bits of engines or planes or tail fins or whatever crashing on the ground below? Wouldn't people have filmed that before the collapse of the buildings? Has she got a point, Field? Why did they just get swallowed up by the buildings?
Well, there's a lot of people who would answer that in a different way than I would, and I've debated several of those people, including a man named John Lear and another man named James Fetzer, and I debated them 2-on-1. It was two of them against me, and they were claiming there were no planes at the World Trade Center on 9/11, and I don't share that opinion, but I do think it's a very good question from Dion in Denmark, because an aircraft like a Boeing 757 or a Boeing 737 or a Boeing 767, any of those aircraft that were just flown into a building, a steel-structured building like World Trade I and World Trade II, if they attempted to penetrate the walls, they would in fact leave a lot of evidence outside. But I think, and I will address that at World Trade I and II, I think the much easier place to study is the Pentagon, where a round hole 16 feet in diameter was made in the outside wall of Wedge 1, and yet there was no impact marks from the wing, the engines, or the empennage, and there were no Boeing 757 wings, engines, or empennage evidence outside the wall. And I think that is the absolute perfect case to study. But in the case, and Dion from Denmark is the one who asked the question, so let's honor her with an answer. A Boeing 757 or 767 or 737 could not do what we all saw done on the morning of 9/11. However, you don't have to study this very much to see video evidence that on the lower right forward fuselage of the flying vehicle that struck the second tower, and that would have been the drone replacement for United 175, there was a conformal weapon on the fuselage. And speaking as an airline pilot who got my airline transport rating in 1973, and I used it continually until 2009 when I retired. I retired from Northwest in 2007 because my truthful dictation of what happened on 9/11 caused the United States Department of Justice and the FAA to want me to be quiet. So in a 10-minute decision, I retired from Northwest. Later, I was recruited by a human resources headhunter from Dublin, Ireland, working for Direct Personnel. The headhunter asked me if I'd like to go to Kazakhstan and fly Airbus jets. And right away, I accepted because I could see what the potential was if myself, and once again, it's not so important who I am, but my name's Field McConnell. And I did retire in 10 minutes. I did go fly Airbus jets with Muslim pilots in Kazakhstan after refusing to fly Boeing jets with American co-pilots in the United States. And the reason I accepted was simply because I knew that the Boeing airliners in the United States of America were modified with an illegal modification. Not that it did not have a patent, because it did. But what made it illegal was the fact that none of the airline pilots in the United States of America were informed of the existence of the Boeing Honeywell Uninterruptible Autopilot.
None of them knew about it. This is what's incredible. This is why this was such an important revelation by you. But before we go briefly back to 9/11, when you took to work in Kazakhstan field, did you not worry that you were in danger? Now, I say this because a guy carrying that information that is as much of a antagonist as you are, let's be honest about it, you're a great operator, but you're an antagonist to the system. You must have thought to yourself, I'm in danger, one of these planes is going to go down that I'm flying in Kazakhstan. Somebody might crash a plane just to get rid of me because of what I'm doing.
Okay, and I'm going to say something very briefly that some of your listeners will not be comfortable with. No, I'm aware of the dangers, and I'm just going to say this in 10 seconds or less. God has protected me. That's it. No more church talk. However, when I went over to Kazakhstan, I had three different events where it was apparent that somebody was trying to silence me. The first was when the Department of Justice and the FAA and the FBI and the Airline Pilots Association tried to get Northwest Airlines to silence me. They did that in the date range of 10 December 2006 to March 7th of 2007. And on March 7th, let me think about this. March 13th, I got a phone call. And I retired in a 10-minute decision because I knew what game was being played. And the game that the United States government plays with whistleblowing pilots is they try to tell you that your job's going to be in jeopardy. And if you don't shut up, they'll tell you to go see a doctor. And if you don't shut up, they'll tell you to go see a shrink. And if you go to the shrink, and in this case, it's a specific shrink psychologist that's paid very well by the Airline Pilots Association to make pilots disappear. His name is Dr. Elliott in Los Angeles. And when I was told...
Now, Phil, sorry to interrupt. When you say make pilots disappear, he makes them disappear by basically taking their wings away, by
Yes.
by writing them off. Basically, he or she is not fit to fly, and that's how he would get rid of them. Yeah.
Yes, that what you say is 100% accurate. Let me just add this. You also disappear as a potential expert witness because once Dr. Elliott assigns a psychological diagnosis to you, you can no longer appear as an expert witness in court. And so when that game was started with me, I retired in a 10-minute decision. And then I was subsequently hired by Kazakhstan's national airline. And to be 100% accurate, I was not hired nor paid by them. I was hired by direct personnel of Dublin,
In
Ireland.
Dublin, yeah, you mentioned in Dublin, yeah.
Yep, and it was my pleasure to fly over in Kazakhstan for 18 months. And most of your listeners don't know that Astana, which is the capital, Astana, Astana, Kazakhstan, is the Dubai of Eurasia. And there are many, many tall buildings, and they're very opulent. And so for the people that have been drinking Kool-Aid for 14 years, that think that it's unsafe to fly with Muslims around tall buildings, I, for one, have flown with Muslims around very tall buildings. There's not one Muslim in the world I've ever met who wanted to kill me. I think by the sound of my voice, you can tell that no Muslim, Christian, or agnostic in the United States or anywhere in the world has killed me yet. And as far as fear goes, I don't have any fear at all, Richie, because I'm 66 years old and I've been blessed abundantly in my life with stimulating things to do, wonderful people to work with, and a very clear mission. And my mission initially was from the time I was 17 until the time I was 59, I was either working towards or working at getting people or ordnance safely from the origination to the destination. Sometimes the destination airport and the ordnance destination would be different, but in 43 years of being on a straight course from being a student at the Naval Academy to be retired from Northwest Airlines, it was always my goal and my duty to provide safe aviation and the transport of passengers, cargo, and or munitions anywhere in the world 24/7, regardless of the weather. And I accomplished my mission, and I didn't do it based on my own stubbornness or my own ability. I was just blessed with the opportunity. And Richie, I would say that you're calling me today, especially on a day where you have Patrick Henningsen on ahead of me. You know, I've been richly blessed today to be able to come on and tell the truth with you and your listeners. Over to you, Richie.
Great, Phil. Good stuff. It's 29 minutes past the hour. I'm just going to read a couple of quick tweets, then do a quick recap. And then there's some really interesting questions coming in for you. Those who are new to the programme, maybe people who have followed Phil from his own programme, if you want to see what people are saying on Twitter, you need only in the search Twitter bar, put Richie Allen Show, all one word, no gaps, press enter, and you will see what others are saying. Marco says, I don't know what happened on 9/11, but it's madness no matter what. Chris McGee says, why is Donald Trump coming out saying he will reopen 9/11? I'm not sure he's exactly saying that, Chris, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, he said if he gets elected, you'll find out who really carried it out. Paul Jackson was on to say, Richie, I believe the Twin Towers were hit by missiles that delivered energy weapons. The planes were inserted into the film, says Paul. Paul, that's an opinion that some people do have. I subscribe to Field's thesis on what happened. I do believe planes were used, Paul, but I do respect your opinion. It's as valid as mine. But I do believe that planes were used, and I did see that footage that Field recommended that you watch, where it appears that underneath the fuselage, a missile or a rocket of some description was fired just before the planes hit. Scott was on to say the same thing. I wonder how sincere Trump's claims of an investigation into 9/11 are. 29 minutes to the top of the hour. Great to have Field McConnell on. Vastly experienced naval aviator, commercial pilot. Check out abeldanger.org. This is the man who blew the whistle on the reality of the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot and its use in commercial airliners without the knowledge of the pilots flying those planes. Massively important, that. And of course it segues into so many of big news events of the last few years: crashes, mysterious crashes and disappearances. Remember, it's abeldanger.org. Field, a number of people have asked me to ask you, and again, we never got into this in previous conversations because we were being very specific, whether it was about MH17 or the German wings or whatever. Tell us about flying commercial or even flying for the military. You must have seen things, Field, in your time flying that defied logic. Things that you looked out your starboard window or you looked out the other side and you thought to yourself, that ain't real, that, or what is it I'm seeing there? That doesn't look like a plane that I've seen before. Talk to us about unidentified flying objects.
Okay, I'll give you three examples, two of which I was exposed to and one of which a friend of mine witnessed, and it made a lot of sense. And I'm just writing myself some notes. One thing I saw, it wasn't a flying object, but it defied logic from a conventional standpoint, was I was in a Northwest 727 departing San Francisco Bay Area to return to Minneapolis on what is called a red-eye flight, where you leave you leave the origination airport late at night, their local time, and you arrive at the destination airport, say between 5 and 6 a.m. And those flights are called red eyes. And that's because your circadian rhythm is interrupted. And when you show up at the destination airport, your eyes are sort of bloodshot. What I saw on that night, it would have been in the mid-1980s, climbing out of San Francisco, every airliner on the frequency witnessed a very powerful illumination of the sky, 360 degrees, and the color of the illumination was not white, it was more blue, and I had no idea what it was. I knew I wasn't imagining things, but even if I thought I wasn't imagining things, the other two people in the cockpit of the Boeing 727 saw it, and the departure control frequency of the San Francisco Bay Area air traffic control facility lit up with a lot of conversation about what in the world was that bright flash. None of us had any idea, and to this date, I have no idea. So since I don't have an idea what that was, I'll stop that and I'll go on to mid-1980s over Canada, probably somewhere 300 to 400 miles north of Winnipeg, Canada. I was up there I was one F-4 Phantom and a flight of 6 F-4 Phantoms, and we were doing an exercise after midnight where we had 3 flights of 2 Phantoms, so there were 6 of us, and we were running racetrack patterns oriented north and south, and we were tasked with intercepting and identifying any flying objects that came into our area of operations. And what we used to call those vertical channels of scrutiny were lanes, L-A-N-E-S. And I was in the center lane, and these lanes face north, and the fighters, there's 2 of them, one facing north, one facing south. The one facing south moves along quickly and regenerates to put his radar on the north, to the north, before the slower moving F-4 takes his radar off the north azimuth of the proposed attack corridor. And on a certain night, it would have been in the mid-80s, frankly, I don't remember when, probably 84, 5, or 6, I got a contact to the left of my nose, and I reported the contact to the military controllers. And of course, we're talking about 30 years ago, but the conversation would have been something like this. Mike Papa 02, contact nose, 10 left, 50 miles, medium, southbound, fast. At which point, the guy to my left in the other lane they said, Mike Papa 03, contact nose 38 miles right, fast, vector south. And so the intercept controller, back in those days, it was called GCI, for ground controlled intercept. The intercept controller said nothing there, meaning he didn't have a return. And yet we had two different F4s that had a return. And so what we did was we both ran on it, which means we tried to intercept it. And some of your really astute listeners would say, well, if you got two F4s in two different lanes running on the same target at night, aren't you going to collide? You would, because if you had two airplanes going to the same position in space at the same altitude, at some point you would collide. Yeah, but we didn't, because we assigned each other altitudes, and the altitudes really don't matter, but they probably would have been, one aircraft is blocking 5 to 9, which means 25 to 29. The other aircraft could have been blocking 0 to 4, which means 30 to 34. And then we both ran on the target.
And could you see it, Phil? What did it look like? What shape was it?
No, we never could see it. But what we did see was it disappeared from our radar screens, and it exited straight north. And as it was leaving, going to the north, it was going so fast, we could not measure its speed nor believe it. Now, the thing that is critical here is whenever you're running intercepts in a military interceptor, which is any fighter that's tasked with the intercept of known or unknown flying objects, you either have your camera on the gun sight or you have it on the radar. And typically with aircraft of the generation of F4s, you would have it on the radar until you got into visual conditions. And the F-16 was the same. You'd run on radar until the pilot could see something, then you'd go to your gun sight. But when we got back to Fargo after our flights, the two crews from the two F4s turned our radar film in, and the radar returns were very evident on both films. So we actually had something up there with us that had the ability to run away from us. And many of your viewers, or your listeners rather, are familiar with F-4 Phantoms. England had them. They call them F-4Ks with the Royal Navy. But they're capable of going Mach 2. And if you can run away from something that's going Mach 2, you got to be going probably Mach 4. Back then in the mid-'80s, there were not any known aircraft that could go beyond Mach 3. And the only aircraft that I was aware of, the Russian Foxbat, could approach Mach 3. I don't know if it could exceed it. But the U.S. SR-71 could fly at Mach 3, but this wouldn't have been a U.S., it would not have been an SR-71. And why do I say that? Because if a SR-71 had been up there as a target, and then it turned tail to run away from us, it would have to lit the afterburners, and we would have seen the afterburners are very visible from a long distance at night. So whatever it was that was out there, I don't know what it was, but it was really there. It was obviously trying to introduce doubt within the air defense community of our ability to control airspace. But when we threatened it, it ran away from us. The last, and I'll make this one really quick, but a friend of mine whose name in real life was Joel McNair was in the back of an F-101 B model. They're called Voodoos, and it's a McDonnell fighter interceptor, one generation ahead of the F-4 Phantom. And one day in the afternoon, when two F-101s took off from Duluth, and they were taking off to the west on runway 27, the tower controller said, and their call sign could have been Spud. I don't recall. At one point, Duluth was called Spud. But let's assume that on this day in the 70s, that their call sign was Spud. The tower said, Spud flight at 2, look north. Do you see what I see? And all four of the heads of the two F-101s looked to the right, which was the north, and they could see an object in the sky that was you couldn't identify what it was. The tower operator didn't know what it was. The interceptor crew, pilot, and WISO stands for Weapon System Operator, they didn't understand what it was or recognize it. So they asked the tower, they said, do you mind if we run on it? And that means, do you mind if we go intercept it? And the tower said, you're cleared to do whatever you need to do. And so those two airplanes turned to the north and lit their afterburners, and they got going probably Mach 1.8, and they could not close on the contact that they had, not only visually with 5 people, 2 pilots, 2 WISOs, and an air traffic controller. They could not close on it at Mach 1.8.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
there's a lot of things flying around that are unknown to the military defenders, but they're well known to the countries that deploy this hardware, whether the country is Russia or Israel or the United States. And so it's nothing to be afraid of. And besides that,
but you wouldn't rule out now the possibility that what you did see might have been otherworldly. I know as a man of instruments and as a man of common sense and a man of training, you're bound to think that this is something that has been manufactured by another government, maybe a hostile government, maybe not, and we've come upon it. But you couldn't rule out that it comes from outside of our atmosphere either.
No, I'd never rule that out for a very simple reason. You can prove a positive. In other words, I can prove your name is Richie Allen by just putting a picture of you up that I Google, Richie Allen plus image, and I'll find your picture, and I'll find your name is spelled Richie, and I'll find out there's a Richie Allen, I think in Manchester, UK, maybe Birmingham, one of the two. But anyway, what you can't prove is you cannot prove a negative. We cannot prove that there was no flying vehicles at World Trade 1 and 2 because you can't prove a negative. That brings us around to your first Twitter person, Dion from Denmark. She's absolutely right. So is everybody else that conclude that an airliner cannot penetrate World Trade 1 or 2 and not have evidence on the outside, with one exception. If the aircraft had a forward-firing piece of ordnance that was capable of piercing or creating a hole not a big hole, but a hole big enough for the plasma of the aircraft to go into. And what plasma is the lowest reducible form of matter. And the way that would have happened, and I'm going to talk real slow here so your listeners can jot down some key words. There is a corporation in France that has an explosive called SMACSonic, SMACSONIC, and SMACSonic has been illegally installed in airliners and drones. And when it is electronically detonated from a remote source, it will increase in heat from ambient temperature, and the ambient temperature inside an airliner is typically 73 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll go from ambient temperature to 5,800 Fahrenheit in a second or less. What that does, and I know that you're quite well informed on this, Richie, but some of your late joining listeners might not be. If we just pictured a child's balloon, and you blow the balloon up until the person blowing the balloon up runs out of air pressure to expand the balloon anymore, then you tie a knot in a balloon, it'll hold the air. But if you were to subject that balloon to a temperature rise from ambient to 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit, the balloon would pop very early. And the reason the balloon would pop is because as the temperature rises, the pressure rises. And this is exactly what happened to the airliners and the drones on 9/11. They had the remote detonation of SMACSonic. It caused the aircraft itself, and the aircraft, if it has human pilots, it may be called an airliner or a transport. If it is also a airline transport category aircraft with no humans, it would be correctly called a drone. And for anybody who thinks that airliners have never been droned, you should stop thinking that and simply Google Boeing 707 plus remote plus crash landing, because a long time ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can see that on YouTube, can't you, Field? You can see them crashing that, yeah. Flown by wire. That's right. Let me ask you on that then. So again, and then I have a couple of quick questions to ask you, because we'll run out of time quickly, and I'm going to press you for a couple of quick answers to a couple of really interesting questions. So again, you think the crews of Flight 93, and the other plane, I never remember the numbers of the planes. Those crews and those passengers never made it onto those planes' field, or they did, and they were taken to another airport and they were killed. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to say I know because I'm certain of what happened. Three of the airliners, and I know that you can't remember the flights, but then you haven't been doing this every day for the last 9 years and
That's true.
Yeah, and I have, and that's not because I want to. But anyway, the airliners in question in their order of disappearance was American 11, United 175, American 77, and United 93. The first three, so that's American 11, United 175, and American 77. Those three airliners were the real human crews, they're real human passengers, and they're alleged, and I'm saying alleged because there's video proof they were on the airliners, and so I presume they were. But there's also a lot of reports that the alleged hijackers were given new identities and later seen in the Middle East. And we're not going to win that argument, so let's not even enter it. Let's just say this, that the passengers and the crews were on all three of those airplanes. All three of those airplanes were replaced by drones after two things had happened to the real airplane. And I'm going to use American 77 because it was my college classmate, Chick Burlingame, that was the captain of that flight. Once they turned on a single autopilot, meaning the crew, Chick Burlingame or his co-pilot, once they turned on a single autopilot, and the Boeing 757 had two, according to the knowledge of the crews, but actually three. One of the autopilots, which is the unauthorized flight director, the crew would not have been aware of. But anyway, when they turn an autopilot on, that allows foreign, in other words, a remote controller to take control of the aircraft via the BUAP, Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot. Then they can introduce a colorless, tasteless, odorless gas into the cabin pressure system and make everybody get relaxed, go unconscious, or be dead. And I believe, and I've convinced Malaysia and Russia and some people in Germany and France that this is what happened on 9/11. I believe that the crew and the passengers of all four of the 9/11 airliners were murdered with discretion and malice aforethought. With the exception of United 3, the other three airliners all went to Whiskey 386 Alpha airspace, which the entry box for that airspace is 60 miles due east of Norfolk, Virginia. The fourth airliner was delayed 41 minutes departing Newark's Liberty Airport, and so it had to be destroyed over Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But once again, it was destroyed by Smacksonic after the crew had been disabled by the triggering of the uninterruptible autopilot to fly the aircraft and the introduction of the gas to calm, put to sleep, or kill. And it's my statement of fact that they killed all the humans. This is also what happened to Malaysia 370. This is also involved in Malaysia 17. It's also involved in the Metrojet A321 over the Sinai on Halloween.
And Fields, you say this with such certainty because you know about Smacksonic, which I only learned about very, very recently.
Yes.
And what you're drawing these conclusions because as an aviator, as somebody who knows planes inside out and mechanically, you've determined that when you rule everything else out and when you accept the existence of the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot, which we know exists, and Smacksonic, which I've only learned about, that basically you've ruled everything out, and you know what you're left with, regardless of how improbable it might be, must be the answer. That's what you've concluded.
Yes, and in fact, if you want to verify that, in March of 2007, David Hawkins and I put out a movie called Captain Sherlock Solves 9/11. It's available on YouTube, and if any of your doubting listeners or even your believing listeners, if they want to see that very quote at the very beginning, I'd say in the first 3 minutes of Captain Sherlock Solves 9/11 on YouTube, you will hear a third voice, that being Neil Slade, who was the movie producer. He said, when you eliminate everything that appears to be possible, the remaining potentialities, regardless of how improbable they seem, has to be the
Has
truth.
to be the truth. Now, I'm going to, I'm not somebody who enjoys interrupting people, but we've only got a few minutes left. In fact, we've got 4 minutes left maximum. And a brilliant question came in from Sean McDonald. This is a brilliant question now. It really is, and I'm not patronising him at all. Richie, please ask Field about the recent deal done by the Iranian government and Boeing. Iran has taken has taken a big contract with Boeing to provide passenger airlines for the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is some question, Field. Does Iran know about the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot? And if they don't, could this be used to stage a false flag event, to do something with a plane and blame it on Iran? Are the Iranians aware of this? It's a great question, this. What do you think?
I think it is a great question. And I think it's an even greater question when you realize that Russia has canceled orders of Boeing aircraft, and the same question could be introduced there. Did they cancel the Boeing 787 in favor of the Airbus A350 because of the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot? I think in the case of Russia, the answer is no. Russia has known about the autopilots for a long time, and I know that for a fact because I told them on May 12th of 2012, 3 days after their Sukhoi Superjet was driven into Mount Salak in Indonesia, I contacted Russia directly.
You wrote to Putin, didn't you?
Yeah, I told him, and Putin, Vladimir Putin knows what's going on. We can assume that Iran knows what's going on. But even if Iran does know about the uninterruptible autopilot, which if they don't know, they're simply not paying attention. But even if they do know about it, they don't know who controls it, or they don't know about the back doors. And I'll say that again, back doors. So Iran could be patsy. And when Malaysia 370 was taken to Diego Garcia on March 8th of 2014, there was another exact replica. There was a twin Boeing 777 painted in Malaysian Airlines livery, meaning paint job, and it was sitting in Tel Aviv in a hangar. And unfortunately for the Israelis, the hangar was not enclosed, and there's many pictures on the internet of the twin to Malaysia 370 sitting in Israel, and the ownership of that aircraft on the day that it was photographed in Israel was an organization in the Miami, Florida area. And it may well have been the purpose of that second Malaysian airplane to create a false flag attack on someone or some country that the perpetrators of the Malaysia 370 capture wanted to implicate. This is very dirty pool. It's extremely evil, but fortunately for the vast majority of the global commoners who are good people, the good people have better minds on our side than the bad people have on their side.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a tragedy that all this information is on abeldanger.org, all the documentation, all these photographs. And to think that, you know, a snowflake has more chance of surviving in hell than the mainstream media will look into the information put out there by Field McConnell. This is the reality that we're faced with in the independent media. We're just about out of time. Field, thanks so much for coming on and taking the random questions with such short notice today. I really appreciate it, more than you'll know. It's abeldanger.org, folks. This is a 5 decades experience naval aviator and commercial pilot. A man who knows aviation backwards, top to bottom, Field McConnell, chatting away to us tonight about 9/11, about what happened to the planes, about the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot again, about Iran there just at the end. Go to abeldanger.org. Field, it was a real pleasure. Thanks for doing it, my friend. It's been a busy old day for you there. I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.
Okay, thank you. The pleasure is mine. I'm going to send you an email in 10 minutes. God bless. Bye-bye.
You too, Field. Bye for now. Field McConnell on the line to us there from Wisconsin.